Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report, all about black holes. Stacy?
Max Keiser. Brussels discovers new 15 billion euro black hole in Greece's finances.
Wait a minute, I'm being sucked into a black hole.
Oh, my, Max. I did mean to tell you don't step too close to the event horizon, the Greek event horizon.
I'm back. Oh, my God. I can't tell you what I saw in the black hole. It was the tragedy, the humanity, the gold. There's all gold in there.
We'll get to that in a moment. Pressure on Greece's recession-stricken economy has intensified after international debt inspectors admitted an additional 15 billion euros would be needed to fill a newly discovered black hole in the country's finances.
Yes, well, we've been saying on this show for months, if not years, that the game being played at the banker level is that they put a gun to the head of the government and say, we need more bailout money. And then a few months later they say, oh, look, we found another $1 trillion in debt. We need more bailout money. And this is recycled, repeated, and recycled again. And the amount of debt in the black hole of debt will never subside because the bailout money used to try to equalize the effects of the black hole of debt is, in fact, itself more debt. Ipso facto, the debt is only going to increase. The only thing different is that the words coming out of the duplicitous, horrendous, psychotic newscasters and bankers that you see in the mainstream media is that they confuse debt with equity.
Well, regarding Greece, you know, it's on-off strikes, violence all over the place. I know you're going to be speaking to Yanis Varoufakis in the second half further about that. But so let's move over to the United Kingdom. We've still got a few quid then. Bank of England's glittering stash of 156 billion pounds in gold bars stored in former canteen under London. Yes, according to the Daily Mail, Max, cash-strapped British people will breathe a sigh of relief when they see these impressive treasure troves. Despite the financial crisis, it seems the country still has some money left in the Bank of England's vault underneath London.
Well, this is such an incredible lie that the financial press didn't even report this and take it at all seriously, because it would mean that the UK has the second biggest gold position in the world.
4,600 tons they claim they found. At the very, 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 very bottom of the article, they do mention, but sadly, not all of it belongs to us. Some is deposited by foreign governments as well as our own.
It's a complete farce. I mean, we know that at most Britain has 300 tons of gold. Gordon Brown sold 300 tons of gold during the period of the introduction of the euro. And Britain would love to have 4,000 tons of gold because as we enter this period of global currency war, those who have the most gold are going to be the big winners, like Germany, for example.
Well, speaking of German gold, one thing you have discussed with Jim Rickards is this notion that the United States could just seize all of Germany's gold because Germany doesn't actually keep most of their gold in their own country. They keep it in New York or over at West Point. So is this just like a test the waters? Maybe, you know, the Bank of England is saying, hey, look, we have 4,600 tons of gold. How did we get it? And pretend amnesia that where it came from?
Yeah, I think they are testing the waters to see if anyone claims it, if anyone steps forward and says, wait a minute, that's our gold. Venezuela took all of its gold back. Germany obviously is exposed. They have 60% of their gold is actually held at the New York Fed. So this is leading up again to this currency war where gold is the central pivot around which the global currency war is fought.
Speaking of the Bank of England, there in the next headline, Bank of England to print further 50 billion pounds. So the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee is set to announce today that it is expanding its quantitative easing program from 275 billion pounds to 325 billion pounds. So even that fake gold, that hologram they presented in the previous headline, that's worth half of what they've already just printed.
All right, well, all the quantitative easing so far, quantitative easing 1, quantitative easing 2, now quantitative easing 3, it hasn't produced any inflation. It hasn't produced any job growth. It hasn't produced any real uptick in wages. I mean, there's a big controversy in the U.S. about the latest job statistic and whether there was an increase or an decrease of the statistical number of people with a job or without a job, which is fakakta nonsense, moot point, going nowhere, because the bottom line is that the real wages are flat to down. So who cares about a monthly statistical anomaly from the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, who are notoriously incorrect and false in their reporting to begin with. But here you have a situation of more quantitative easing, which is more debt, which means that the British economy will contract. It's going to contract because you're adding more debt. But they don't want to call it debt. They call it money, they call it equity. It's just more debt. So it's a psychotic suicide mission. You know what this country needs? You know what this world needs? We need to remake that movie Charles Bronson, Death Wish, with a vigilante who goes after bankers. That would be a fantastic movie, and I would like to put myself forward as starring in that film and being the Charles Bronson character. Hollywood, call me. I'm willing to do this film for scale.
Whoa! I think it's coming out of the black hole, Max! Look, RGB Anarchy has come up with a film just like that. Here's a little clip of you confronting Timmy G, Hanky P,
Mervyn
and the King.
Mervyn King. There it is.
Did you bring a horse for me?
Looks like we're shy of one horse.
You brought too many.
Yes, that was Charles Bronson in a Sergio Leone Western, spaghetti Western. Then Bronson went on to make the Death Wish series, which I'd like to be in the Death Wish movie. Max Keiser in the Charles Bronson movie, stalking bankers in New York with a big frickin' gun!
Well, Max, you did confront Mervyn King there. Bank move could make pensioners poorer. Savers on the verge of retirement are facing the prospect of becoming permanently poorer as the Bank of England prepares to expand its program of quantitative easing, otherwise known as QE, by £50 billion this week. So a person about to retire will be hit by the bank's move because the value of annuities bought on retirement is based on returns from UK government bonds called gilts. These investments are bought by the bank during the easing process, thus driving down the yields.
The phrase permanently poorer stands out. All of the quantitative easing programs so far have failed in stoking growth, income, wage appreciation. They have made a few bankers extraordinarily wealthy. They would like to increase the rate of wealth transference from the many who will now become permanently poor to the very top 1% of the top 1%. I submit to you that this is neo-feudalism. This is feudalism. Had it not been for the Black Plague, we never would have had the middle class to begin with. If you recall your history, this is why lords paid the peasants a few extra bucks, because they had been wiped out in the plague. Well, now the lords want to go back to the 15th century or the 14th century and say, you know what? We're back in charge. Forget the middle class. It's all about indentured servitude and being permanently poor.
Well, Dr. Ross Altman, director of SAGA, the over 50s group, says that savers retiring today are being locked into a lower pension for life, becoming permanently poorer because of the drop in annuity rates. QE is supposed to provide a temporary boost to the economy, but we need to find less damaging ways of providing such a boost. So Dr. Altman is suggesting that instead of, right now, the Bank of England is going to the middleman, the banksters, giving the banksters the money and saying, here, banksters, go give it to all those peasants out there. They say it's about that. So if they really wanted that, however, why doesn't the Bank of England actually just give that money to small businesses and small business loans? It goes part and parcel with this whole, the way we have neo-feudalism runs on toll booths. throughout the economy that are handed, these cartels are handed to certain select elite connected to the king. In this case, literally connected to Mervyn King. So these guys, whether it's Hollywood or Goldman Sachs, if they are the middleman between the king and you, the peasant, it's a very profitable business.
Right, so they're arguing about what's the most humane way to euthanize the middle class and poor. They think, well, you know, if we chop their heads off in the public square, that's a bit too harsh, so we're going to give them the needle instead, which is quantitative easing or financial oppression.
Well, but speaking of central banks, Max, Facebook has filed for an IPO, and I want to turn to this headline here. Is Facebook a central bank too? Edward Castronova, a telecommunications professor at Indiana University, says he's fascinated by the rise of what he calls wildcat currencies, such as Facebook credits. Facebook's buildup of credits suggests more than just some minor dalliance. Facebook already takes payments for credits in more than 40 currencies, ranging from the euro to the Vietnamese dong. Exchange rates are adjusted daily. It probably won't be long until some economist tries to calculate the inflation rate, money supply velocity, or other traditional dimensions of the Facebook economy. Now, Max, you were the world's first virtual central banker. You were Dr. Zeros at HSX. So what are your thoughts on this story?
That's absolutely right. This is a virtual currency, and you need a virtual central banker to deal in the monetary policies that will affect the virtual economy. But this is basically inflationary on the one side of the equation, but the net result will be hours and hours lost from the productive economy from people wasting time on Facebook. So in a way, it's net deflation, because although you can flood the Facebook economy with more credits, the net result will be people not working but wasting time. So it's a way to increase the deflationary trend by issuing a credit that's not backed by debt, but it's backed by wasting time. This is the first currency, well, not the first. I created the first one, of course, back in 1996 with the Hollywood dollar and the central banker. But this is a currency backed by time wasting.
Well, finally on this headline, Max, Zynga is the currency traded on Facebook, and the question I think is answered that when Facebook filed their IPO, Mark Zuckerberg, in his letter, did say that Zynga was crucial to the success of Facebook. Zynga soared 16.4% and then 2.5% in the aftermarket on the news. So I think it does answer the question whether or not Facebook is a central bank.
Thank you so much, Stacy Herbert. I'll be speaking with Yanis Varoufakis after the break, a Greek economist. So that should be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming away, so stay right there.
The Close-Up team has been to the Khabarovsk region, where the country's mineral wealth starts its way across the ocean. Now RT goes to the area. Once named after Lenin, but looking to a different character to represent itself, where local businesses are striving to build the aviation capital of Russia. and where the 4x4s are made and can be tested to the limit. Welcome to the Ulyanovsk region. Russia Close-Up on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time to go to Athens, Greece, and speak with economist, professor, and author, Dr. Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thank you. It's a delight being here.
All right, Yanis, here's the headline. No reforms, no bailout. What's the latest going on in the Greek bailout drama?
Well, it's a very simple story. This deal is simply going to fail just like the previous one in May 2010, because you have a bankrupt entity, the Greek state, and you keep piling new debts on it, on condition that this country is going to shrink its GDP, its national income, from which those debts will have to be repaid further. And at some point, the German taxpayers have had enough. And this is the problem. The German political elites are in a kind of contest with the German electorate. And all this drama in Athens is completely besides the point.
It seems like a case really of financial sadism. In other words, there are a number of ways to extricate Greece from this problem. One would be, for example, to prosecute the bankers who fraudulently got Greece into the euro to begin with. But none of the obvious solutions are being pursued. Instead, they're going down the path of very slowly beating Greece to death in a very sadistic way. Is it the IMF, now Christine Lagarde, is it just a case of sadists having fun with Greece?
I think it's worse than that, Max. I think it's a case of sadomasochism. The obvious thing to do with Greece is to allow it to default, to face the truth that it's a bankrupt state, and then to find out what to do about the banks and recapitalize them if they want to do that. But of course they're not doing this, because recapitalization, legally speaking, means that the current owners of these banks will see their holdings, their shareholdings, being severely diluted by the European state. And so the bankers don't want to hear of this. They want receiving free money from the ECB and from the taxpayers of Germany and Holland and so on and so forth. So Germany's leaders have effectively dug a big hole for themselves, and they've fallen in it. Now, of course, the people who actually suffer in terms of basic human costs, that is hunger and just genuine human hardship, are the people in the deficit countries, Greece being the worst, but the rest are not doing much better, in Spain, in Portugal, in Ireland. And this whole process is simply spiraling out of control.
Right, and the average person in Greece is having their minimum wage cut by 20 to 25%. Currently it's 750 euros per month. It'll be cut down to 600 euros per month. So this is just, they're scapegoating the average person, right? Just, again, on the sadism theme, they somehow are just basically committing kind of a financial genocide for fun, right?
It's not for fun from their perspective. It's a benefit for anyone, for sure. But from their perspective, look, Mrs. Merkel has a very important task ahead to survive until the federal election, and to have her coalition survive. She needs to give Greece, the Greek government, the bailout loans that then the Greek government will pass on to the banks. Now, she has recalcitrant members of parliament in the federal parliament, and she needs to convince them that this must be done. But she can't come out and openly say that this is all for the benefit of the banks. So she has to couch all this in the language of solidarity. Now, the German taxpayer does not want to show any solidarity with Greece. So the only way of placating the German members of parliament and the electorate that they represent is by saying to them, look, watch those Greeks suffer. Okay? If they suffer sufficiently, then perhaps we should give them some money. So the whole point of reducing the minimum wage from 700 to 600 euros I mean, there is no macroeconomic rationale whatsoever involved with this. The only point of doing this is to demonstrate to the German members of parliament, in particular of the ruling coalition, that look, the Greeks are bleeding. So let us give them more loans, when of course those loans are not meant for the Greeks, they're meant for the banks.
Okay, so Merkel, to play to her constituents, is going to continue to bleed the Greek people, and so that they are visibly suffering, because this will then appease her local constituents that she's doing all she can to commit an act of horror, financial horror, to these Greek people. Now, last week, Paul Thompson, head of the IMF mission to Greece, conceded that social tolerance and political support have their limitations. And of course, this was before the home of Greek president was hit with a Molotov cocktail. But your thoughts on Thompson's statement?
Paul Thompson is a tragic figure. He's here supposedly representing the International Monetary Fund, and his script from which he has to recite his lines was written by Germany. Germany has effectively subcontracted to the IMF, and to Mr. Thompson in particular, the task of imposing onto Greece the austerity measures that Berlin has decided upon. But the IMF does not believe in these austerity measures. So Mrs. Christine Lagarde is making some quite notable and interesting speeches that are arguing against the kind of medicine that Greece is applying to the Greek patient. And yes, Mr. Thompson is caught in between those two quite diverse mindsets. One is that of his bosses in Washington, and the other is the German leadership, which has subcontracted Mr. Thompson to effect policies that Mr. Thompson knows are quite poisonous, not only for Greece, but more generally for the global economy.
Okay, now, this is interesting. The bureaucrats in Brussels have just found another 15 billion euro black hole in Greek finances. This seems to be a recurring theme. How many more black holes do you expect to be found in Greek financial universe before it's all over?
It really depends on whether Germany is ready to let the Eurozone go. Germany has not decided that it wants to reconstitute the Deutschmark and get out. They're going to be plugging the black holes with more money, either minted by the ECB or guaranteed loans from the German taxpayer. Greece is neither here nor there. It is not significant or important enough to worry about the state of its macro accounting, national accounting, or indeed of the real economy on the ground.
So, should Greece have ever taken that first IMF loan bailout package, Yanis?
I've made myself incredibly unpopular in this country when in April to May 2010 I was advocating that taking that bailout loan was the equivalent of collective suicide, and it would constitute one of those instances in world economic history that would be taught as an example to be avoided in economics departments for the next 100 years.
How about the recent decision to there's an Iran oil embargo going into Greece? This seems like really another foolish mistake, but what are your thoughts, Yanis?
The Greek Prime Minister of a year or 2 years ago, Mr. George Papandreou, who was responsible for taking us into the bailout Mark I disaster, nevertheless said one thing before that happened, which was quite ahead of its time, and I think correct. He said that if we are ever to fall into the bosom of the IMF and the European Union, we're going to lose our national sovereignty. And this is precisely what has happened. Greece that is not in control of its fate anymore. National sovereignty is a thing of the past until and unless some new Greek government can simply say no to the bailout loans that are being on offer to the Greek social economy.
Right. Now, most Germans, according to a poll last weekend, want Greece to leave the euro. So, should Greece leave the euro, or should Germany leave the euro? Your thoughts?
Well, you know, if there were an opinion poll back in just before the Industrial Revolution, and people were asked whether they want the Industrial Revolution, most of them would have said no. That didn't stop the Industrial Revolution. Similarly, even if all the Germans and all the Greeks want Greece out of the euro, and let me inform you that most Greeks would like to get out of the euro now. We've had enough of being treated like the pariahs of the eurozone. It's immaterial. This is a currency we should never have entered into, neither us nor the Germans for that matter. But tragically, it is a currency that once you enter, you cannot escape. If we get out of it, we're not going to return to where we would have been had we not constructed it. Instead, the way that this currency has locked our economies together and has created this cascade of insolvencies between banks and states, if Greece pulls out, let's say, or is thrown out, the whole edifice will collapse. Germany is going to enter into a huge recession, and the rest of Europe is going to be, an ocean of stagflation. So I think that we are between a rock and a hard place. The only path that would minimize somehow the human cost of it all would be one of redesigning the euro and taking it back from what I call bankruptocracy and putting it in the service of Europe.
You know, it's interesting that despite the crisis, Greece is still buying weapons. They're still spending lots of money on weapons. It's kind of interesting for two reasons. Number one, they don't really have money to buy weapons. Number two, if they really want to fight the war, they should be buying financial weapons, like they should be hiring financial mercenaries to attack Germany with credit default swaps if they really wanted to be on a level playing field and try to fight for their survival. But isn't this buying of conventional weapons, again, another huge waste of money by Greece?
It's worse than that. You're assuming that the Greek government is deciding what to do. It is not. It's being told by Germany what to do. If you look at the purchases, the procurement of weaponry, it constitutes a very large proportion of German armaments exports. And in one sense, Germany is saying, well, I'm giving you the money and I'm going to tell you what to do with it. But that money, of course, adds to Greece's debt and also to the profits of the German armaments industry. So it's quite interesting that while hospitals are having to do without bandages, let alone more sophisticated instruments to fight disease, the Ministry of Defense is not given the opportunity of cancelling the order for German tanks and submarines.
Okay, well, Germany is going to look like they're going to pick up a lot of nice beachfront property on the cheap. That's all the time we have for Dr. Yanis Varoufakis. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Yanis Varoufakis. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.